Hi, my name is George Jordan, and I've been attending Second Baptist for the past 12 years. I grew up in a Christian family, and my parents always told me I could come to Christ whenever I felt like I truly needed him. When I was 7, I came crying into my parents' bedroom, telling them how I knew I was a sinner and didn't want to go to hell. Looking back on it now, it seemed a little extreme for a 7-year-old, but I did end up accepting Christ that night. From the age of 7, I was able to grow in my faith, as my parents would emphasize early on how important prayer was in recognizing your blessings throughout your day. I'd also be able to grow in my faith as my parents emphasized how God would be the forefront of my life. As kids, we were given the opportunity to dive into a variety of extracurricular activities, such as sports that occur on Saturdays and Sundays. My parents said, "I know you may want to go run in a track meet or play in a basketball game on a Sunday, but instead, we're going to go to church, and one day you'll thank us for it." It didn't really click till later on in life how easy it would have been to not go to church at all during my early years. Yet it was this foundation of youth ministry through elementary and middle school that prepared me for the challenges to come. My sophomore year of high school was when these new challenges would begin to emerge. I'd never really gone through any hard circumstances per se, but that was about to change. That year, one of my close friends had invited me to her family Halloween party. The only thing I love more than a party with my friends would have to be a theme party. There's just something so thrilling about dressing up as whoever you want without being judged for the night. The costumes that night ranged anywhere from a golfer to an FBI agent to even a whole mariachi band. And the night was long. My friends and I had been at the party for around 5 hours or so before we became bored. While the night seemed like it was beginning to drag on, this also meant that the family who had the younger kids began to exit, slowly dispensing the huge inflatable bouncy house. But as the night grew later, my friends and I did not see a large inflatable bouncy house. We saw an arena. We saw our Coliseum divided for the night. There were 6 of us, and I was the second tallest and weighed the most, creating this false sense of security for the fights to come that night. The rules were simple: no punches, no slaps, no cheap shots, and no head hits. Long story short, what started off as a competitive wrestling match between friends turned into a monumental turning point in my life. That night, I sustained a significant injury to the right back corner of my head. I would feel pain at first, but I wouldn't really think anything of it. It actually wasn't until the next day at the 11:11 service that the damage would become evident. I remember listening to the music, taking in the message, and exiting after closing. I was in pain, excruciating pain. My head felt cloudy, and I told my parents I felt as though I was going to pass out. The next day, I'd go to my pediatrician who would inspect a dollar bill-sized bump on the back corner of my head. The day after that, I'd go to a specialist who would diagnose me with a moderate concussion. At first, I didn't realize how severe this concussion was. I had sustained a minor concussion in middle school in gym class. I thought this one would be the same. I was wrong. This concussion affected my balance, my depth perception, heightened and dulled my emotions, and damaged my ability to recall information. I had one specialist even tell me there was a chance that my pain and my headaches may never go away. I was no longer able to go to church services, listen to music, run, work out, play guitar, piano, look at screens of any kind, or hang out with my friends in loud environments. I didn't really know what to do. I'd already missed 3 days of school due to doctor's appointments and the head pain. I had class and testing accommodations, but no accommodations could make up for how I was feeling mentally and physically. I soon began to realize I was now slow compared to the rest of my peers, and this became evident in my more difficult classes, including AP World History, English, and Pre-Cal. I had to drop down to a lighter class in Pre-Cal as I could no longer memorize the information at the same pace I once was able to. This was really discouraging because I knew that without the concussion, I would have succeeded. My brain simply was not retaining the information that was being presented to it. Whenever I tried to remember anything, the connections simply weren't there. It left me feeling lost and hopeless. This was the year I was supposed to finally have a grasp on high school. This was the year I was supposed to bounce back academically from a confused freshman year. This was the year I was supposed to train to make the varsity track team in my sophomore year. I felt lost and incapable of living the life I once had. But this low point would not go away. These thoughts would play on repeat in my head, and I felt as though I had so many blessings and opportunities, but I had failed. I still retained the will to live, but I just felt insignificant. I'd end up going into a state of depression for the next 5 months. During this period of time, I would see a psychologist who would help counsel me and help me mentally transition my way of thinking back to what it was before the concussion. I remember on one of the early sessions, she asked, "George, do you believe you were smart?" And I replied, "No." My self-confidence was crushed during this period of time. I felt that no one really knew how hard this concussion was on me. The severity of my headaches increased whenever I had to go to school or do work, so that by the time I'd come home, I would do nothing, just to have the pain lessen. I'd come home, go to my room, sit in a chair by my bed in the dark. Sometimes I'd sit there for hours, staring at a wall, trying to ignore the pain. I was sad, but when I was not sad, I was angry. I was angry at God. How could God do this to me? How could God take away the things I love so dear? I became so emotional one night that I began to cry and I broke down on my knees. I prayed to God and I asked Him to help me through the long process of recovery I had ahead. I begged Him to show me His plan for the future, and I told Him that I would trust Him. With a fresh perspective, a new perspective, I would take a deep breath and slowly begin healing mentally and physically over the next 5 months of school. Once the summer of my sophomore year rolled around, I'd already completed physical therapy, but I still had residual headaches, which would not end until later in the summer. I'd end up attending a beach retreat, which would serve as a form of spiritual revival to reflect on the year I'd had. Even with concussion, I'd performed better academically than I had my freshman year. Even when I believed God had abandoned me, He had not. I had my doubts through this, but I was able to realize that God had a plan. I didn't have to worry about the future or what was to come, as it would all work out in the end. Taking 6 AP classes, I'd end up achieving my goal of raising my GPA, attaining a perfect 5.0 in my fall and spring semesters of junior year. God took me from my low point, when I felt insignificant, and showed me my full potential with hard work and His guidance. This fall, I will be attending the University of Texas at Austin studying business. A dream I would never have envisioned 2 years ago. I have a newfound confidence. Sometimes, in the midst of the challenges, people don't want to hear, "Have faith, trust in God. It'll work out in the end." But it is enlightening when you stop and you think about what those words really mean. God had a plan, and He would never leave me. God is El Roy, the God who sees. We see this depicted in Genesis chapter 16. When Hagar flees into the desert to escape her oppressors, she believes that God has left her. Instead, we see God surround her with His grace and His care. She was never alone, and God would never leave her, nor will He ever leave us in the midst of our challenges. This story of God's name allows us to remember that even when we feel no one else is there, when no one else is watching, when no one can see the future, he sees. Genesis 16:13 says, "She gave this name to the Lord, who spoke to her. 'You are the God who sees me,' she said, 'and I have seen the one that sees me.'" There will be times when we feel lonely and defeated, and there will be times when we feel fulfilled and triumphant. But in the end, God sees. God has a plan. I am confident. I know that no matter what challenges may come into my life, God has a plan, and they will shape me into the man he wants me to become. I may not be able to see the second phase of his plan or the third, but it doesn't matter because he sees. I'm able to recognize his power in my life and that I can't do it on my own. I'm able to recognize that I cannot live this life on my own strength, but on his alone. Elroy. Hook 'em.
Hi, my name is Lizzie Wiesen, and I have grown up at Second Baptist Church my entire life. I'm a senior here at Second Baptist School, and I'm about to complete my 14th year at SBS. When I was little, I accepted Christ, but I didn't fully understand what that meant. I decided to become a Christian because all of my older siblings and my cousins were, but I had no idea what being an actual Christian looked like. If someone were to ask me 2 years ago to share my testimony with them, I would have looked at them and laughed. 2 years ago, I thought I had no testimony because nothing big or earth-shattering had happened in my life. Little did I know that God was going to use my last 2 years in high school to grow me in ways I could have never expected. I have always been petite, and when I was 12 years old, I was diagnosed with constitutional growth delay, which meant my bones thought I was 3 years younger than I actually was. So, although I was 12 years old, I looked like a 9-year-old. And as a middle school girl, that was rough because insecurities were heightened and everyone was just trying to survive and make it to high school. I have learned to not let my size identify me, but I must admit, it has been hard to tell myself that God has created me perfectly and beautifully and that my physical appearance does not determine my worthiness. Up until my junior year of high school, battling with my petite size had been the hardest thing I walked through. But then junior year came, and it hit me hard with the amount of schoolwork, social events, and health complications. I have a very sensitive stomach, and in the fall of 2017, I was experiencing extreme stomach pains out of the blue. The pains were so intense that they felt crippling. So I had an endoscopy, and the doctor saw that I had 2 stomach ulcers, which explained why I was in so much pain. Thankfully, I was able to take medicine, and the pain subsided. After junior year, I was so pumped for senior year. I thought it would be a super chill and laid-back year, and I thought I would know where I would be going to college pretty soon. However, that did not happen. When I applied for my first choice school, the University of Texas, I expected to be admitted without a doubt. People told me I had no reason to worry about getting accepted, which probably should have been my first warning sign. And I still remember the day, January 25th, 2019, to be exact, when I checked my UT account and saw that I was rejected. It felt like my world had crumbled. The place where I thought I would be spending my next 4 years rejected me, and I did not know how to respond. My dreams of being with my older sister Caroline, who is currently a sophomore at UT, were immediately destroyed. But God was using this to test me. He was using this to grow me in ways I could have never imagined. But before things got better, they got a lot worse. Exactly a week later, I woke up at 3 a.m. with horrific stomach pains again. The pains were so intense that I started vomiting, so my parents took me to the ER. Once I got to the ER, they put me on morphine. But even the morphine wasn't numbing the pain. As my health continued to decline, the ER doctor had me transported to the St. Luke's Hospital in the Med Center. Long story short, they did another endoscopy on my stomach and found that it was inflamed. The doctor said it looked like someone had poured a lighter fluid down my stomach and lit a match. After being rejected from UT and spending a night in the hospital, I was sure there was no way anything else that was bad could happen to me. However, I was wrong again. A week after I left the hospital, I woke up at 3 a.m. again with my whole body itching. I didn't think much of it, so I put on lotion and went back to bed. But when I woke up the next morning, it looked like a biblical plague had hit me. I was covered in hives, and my face had a very bad case of an acne attack. As the hives continued to get worse and spread from my face all the way down to my calves, my dermatologist finally realized that I was having an extreme allergic reaction to the medicine the doctor from the hospital gave me. In the span of 2 weeks, I found out that I was rejected from UT, was admitted into the hospital, and woke up with hives all over my body. It felt like my life was falling apart. And to top it all off, my mom woke up one morning during all of this with Bell's palsy. Half of her face was paralyzed, and I thought she was having a stroke. But during this rough time, my mom and dad were studying the book of Job. And wow, did Job suffer to the extreme. He lost his family, his wealth, his health, and all of his possessions. Job 2 verses 7 states that Satan left the Lord's presence and inflicted Job with terrible boils from the soles of his feet to the top of his head. And when I had hives covering my body from head to toe, I felt just like Job. Now granted, my situation was not nearly as bad as Job's, but I still experienced the faithfulness and love of God in a way I never had before. In the beginning of the book of Job, Job refers to God as Elohim, meaning mighty one, or the supreme one. But after Job experiences his immense suffering, he refers to God as Yahweh, meaning I am. Job discovers through his pain that God is still sovereign, holy, and worthy of praise. In Job 42 verses 5, Job proclaims, "My ears have heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you." Job truly experiences intimacy with Yahweh even when his life was utterly destroyed. I have a type A personality, and I like to control everything. So when my life was out of control, I knew God was doing something big. He was using this time to draw me close to him. He is Elohim, mighty and supreme, but he is also Yahweh, I am. God has always been good and always will be good. He wanted to take my surface level faith and make it 10 times deeper. I'm not gonna lie though, there were times when I was mad at God. There were times when I was confused and asked, why me? But I have learned that God is good, no matter what is going on. After I found out that I was rejected from UT, my parents and I decided that I should appeal to the admissions office in Austin. So I put on my big girl pants and drove myself up to the admissions office in Austin and walked in willing to talk to anyone who worked there. After I walked in, I met in person with someone from the appeals committee, the person who could possibly be deciding whether or not to accept my appeal and therefore admit me into the university. God arranged that opportunity for me. But even after I met with this man from the appeals committee, I was still super doubtful that UT would admit me. I kept telling myself there was no way UT would accept my appeal and that the Lord must have shut the door at UT and wanted me somewhere else. But I kept asking why God had placed a desire on my heart to be at UT, and that desire never went away. God is so faithful, and I am so beyond excited to say that UT did admit me for my appeal, and I will be attending the University of Texas. If God wanted to, he could have easily allowed me to be admitted in January instead of initially getting rejected. But he didn't. Instead, God used my rejection and my illnesses to allow me to rely on him in a way I never had before. And I have never felt so desperate in my entire life. But during this time, I have learned that God is Elohim and he is Yahweh. And I would never, ever trade any of the trials I have faced this spring for anything. God revealed so much of himself to me. I am so beyond grateful that he opened up his arms wide and called me to take refuge in him. And no matter what you are facing today, whatever trial you may be experiencing right now, remember that God is there for you, just like he was for Job and for me.
Hello, my name is Caleb Fusco. I'm a senior at Clemens High School, and I've grown up at Second Baptist Church. Being here for so long has had a huge impact on my life. Even as a young boy, I remember sitting in jump and thinking to myself, yeah, I want to be on the jump team one day. Now, I serve on the jump team and love every second of it. Even though I've grown up at the church and have a great family, my life has had some rough times, like what we went through with my grandpa. My grandpa was awesome. Every time I went to my grandparents' house, he would always let me put on his cowboy hat and boots, and I would just run around the house like a cowboy. My grandparents would also play a ton of different board games with me. As a little kid, that's the best thing ever. When I was 4 years old, my grandpa discovered that he had a 99% blockage in his carotid artery and needed to have surgery to get it removed. Unfortunately, the doctors did not remove all of the blockage. There were some complications. He ended up having a stroke and fell into a coma for 3 months. Eventually, while in this coma, he passed away, leaving my grandma and my entire family behind. I also had a great relationship with my grandma. Again, she was super fun and would play a ton of different board games with me. I always had a blast with her. My grandparents were married for about 50 years. As with most couples who have been married that long, after my grandpa had passed away, my grandma was very depressed about it. She wasn't clinically depressed, just sad that her significant other had just passed away. The brave heart that she had would always put on a happy face for my sister and I because she didn't want to make us upset. One day, she wasn't feeling well, so she went to the doctor. They gave her a quick checkup, diagnosed her with stomach pain, gave her the medicine, and sent her home. After a couple of weeks, the pain wasn't subsiding, so she called my parents one night and pleaded with them to take her to the emergency room. This time, they admitted her. They ran her a multitude of tests. Most of the tests came back inconclusive, but after a while, they found that she had stage 4 pancreatic cancer and was terminal. Unfortunately, after a while of being in the hospital, she finally passed away. But this wasn't the end of our trials. In early September of 2008, my dad started developing symptoms of what he thought was chest pain. So he went to the doctor, they ran him a couple of tests, and they diagnosed him with heartburn. In mid-September of 2008, Hurricane Ike hit. My family decided to stay home and ride out the hurricane. We decided that we were gonna make a little temporary shelter in the middle of our hallway, pulled my mattress right out of my room, and we slept there in the middle of the hallway. This was very stressful for my family because the storm was a lot worse than we had expected. After the hurricane had passed, my dad's heartburn had still not passed and was getting worse. He went back to the doctor, they ran some more tests, and eventually found that he had stage 1 lymphoma. My parents did not break the news to my sister and I, probably because the stress at our house was extremely high. We were dealing with the aftermath of the hurricane and the quick and untimely death of my grandmother. When my dad found out that he needed to take chemo and would eventually lose all of his hair, he started to cut his usually pretty long hair pretty short. I figured something was going on because my dad loved and still loves his long hair. Eventually, he broke the news to us as gently as he could. For the next year and a half, the doctors would give him the most aggressive treatment they could at MD Anderson. Eventually, he lost all of his hair and would go through times when he couldn't even speak because of his reaction to the medicine. During this time, we developed our own special sign language to tell each other goodnight, and that he loved us. He knew I was scared, so every night he would stay with me until I fell asleep. Him comforting me all those nights really made me feel safe, because even in my own personal storm, I knew my parents were my anchor and they were right there with me. God, through my parents, would keep my eyes focused on him and tell me that everything was going to be okay. Sometimes when I went to school, I would cry in class because all I wanted to do was go home and be with my dad. After a year and a half of prayer and trust, my dad defeated the battle with cancer, and he has his long hair back. A few years later, in April of 2012, my mom, sister, and I were heading to Live on a Wednesday night. We stopped at Buffalo Grill, right across the street. While we were there, my mom received a phone call from my dad, who got a phone call from the police that my paternal grandfather had just passed away from a heart attack. He was getting ready to take his dog Toby on a walk. When the neighbors were walking by, they saw him walking around the front yard with just his leash on, but not my grandfather. The neighbors went to go find him, and they eventually found him lying on the ground in his kitchen and proceeded to call the police, who then called my dad. Just as I had gotten out of 2 storms with my family, I'm in yet another one with my grandfather. It was a lot harder to keep my eyes focused on God when my grandfather passed suddenly. It was so hard, but every day while I was at school or at home, my parents would call me and just let me talk about everything I was feeling. And then, when I was done with that, they would pray with me, tell me everything was going to be okay, and just to remember the good times that I had with my grandfather. Through it all, I never lost faith in God. I did ask him the classic question, why? Why is all of this happening to me? Why does everybody else get to watch? Why do everybody else's grandparents get to watch them graduate high school, but not mine? I did ask him all of these questions, but I never stopped trusting in his power. As I reflect on these stories, the name of God that he presented himself to me is El Elyon. El Elyon is the name used through the Old Testament and tells us that God is above all gods. Nothing in life is more sacred. Psalm 83:18 says, that they may know that you alone, whose name is Lord, are most high over all the earth. He is most high. He is bigger than any problem we may face in our daily lives. He is greater than any force of darkness in this world. He showed me through my dad that with the power of prayer, nothing is bigger or greater than God. El Elyon was my anchor through the storm, constantly keeping my eyes on him. God is more powerful than anything I may face and have faced. He will never lose his power and might through the darkness of this world. He has used me through my experiences to lift people up, to tell them to keep their eyes focused on God because he has a stronghold on them and he will never let go.
It's easy when we hear students share stories like this to, in some ways, disassociate ourselves from what we hear. It's easy to dismiss them and say, you know, they're just students, they're just kids, and there's a lot of life in front of them. But did you listen to their stories? Did you listen to what they talked about? Fear, sadness, anger, confusion, rejection, loss. Can't we all relate to that? If you listen beyond the emotion, you hear something really important. a common thread that's woven throughout all of their lives. This thread of surrender and trust. In their lives, in each one of those lives, there's a moment, a place, and a time where they say, you know what, God, I give myself to you. I surrender myself to you. I trust in your goodness, and I trust in who you are. Every year at Beach Retreat, we sing the song that's playing right now. It's a simple song. It simply says something beautiful, something good. So that's what God does. When we surrender, when we truly lay our lives at his feet, he picks those broken pieces up and starts to put them back together. And the result of that is truly something beautiful. If you're in this room and you can relate to any of them, rejection, hurt, loss, fear, anger, confusion, I invite you, just like they've done, lay your life at the feet of our Lord and Savior and let him begin to put those broken pieces back together. I know many of you did not plan, maybe you haven't thought a lot about your life and responding at a time like this, but I encourage you, if that's you this morning, don't walk out these doors. Don't leave this place. The Lord's speaking to you. If that's you, you need to give your life to him. In a moment, we're going to sing a song. Just simply stand up, walk down front. Pastors will be here to greet you. If you're someone in this room, you're looking for a church home. You say, man, I want to be a part of a church that values and invests in the lives of this next generation. I want my family to be a part of something like that. We would love to help you become part of this church family. We can help you grow in your relationship, your family's relationship with Jesus Christ. Either one of you want to give your life to Christ, looking for a church home. If that's you, as we sing this song, simply stand up, walk down front. Most important decision you could ever make, and allow God to begin to make something beautiful out of your life. If that's you, as we sing this song, you respond, you come.